Hey guys, so we've had many events post Supreme Darkness, and so as usual I wanted to provide a tier list of the best hand traps and board breakers in the current format based on topping lists as well as some online play, and also shout out to John Waggio for always showing enthusiasm for wanting these staple tier lists. And as always, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh singles as well as supplies. I do have a new sponsor in Derpy cards. You can definitely use code Hakuna5 for 5% off Waggio singles there, so definitely go check them out. And as always, definitely a shout out to YGOProduct.com. I'm using their top cards section just to provide some data for the tier list, and also of course a thanks to Ivan as always for keeping track of the meta relevant tops. So let's just get started with the staple tier list for this month, and we are actually starting off with Artifact Lancia. It's just kind of funny how this has seen no play in the last like 5 years or so, and then just now is the most played hand trap because of Malice. You know, left unchecked, especially let's say in game 1 situations, they're just really strong without something like this, or Chaos Hunter, as well as some of the Mulcharmies, for example, that we'll get to. But just being able to prevent them from being able to banish, really strong, and it actually kind of comes in handy against some other niche selections as well. So for example, let's say something like Crystron, they also suffer from Lancia. Even Memento, this can do some wonders as well. So it's definitely a card that you most likely need to have in your side. And then you have Ash Blossom, which I guess speaking of Mulcharmies, it's there for that as well. But you know what? It's pretty generic right now. Let's say against Raizio, I mean, sure, I guess Duo Drive. Against Malice, I find it doesn't really come out that much. I don't know, maybe like stop the Chesacat draw, I guess. People also Ash the Allure to prevent them from getting off. You have some other newer decks that, let's say like Blue Eyes, you know, Ash on Wishes can be very strong because they're having to discard a card for that. Against Mermail, maybe like the Goon special summon effect, but single hand drops like that against Mermail, usually not really effective. You need multiple. And you have other, let's say Fiendsmith, Slop, you know, hitting the Requiem definitely comes up as well. And then you have Imperm, which is usually up there along with Ash, like historically speaking. And again, it's still really good. It doesn't play into talents, which is very important right now, just because of so many hand traps being around. Unfortunately, you can't really save the Imperm for your turn now for like Detonator ever since Supreme Darkness, just because they can just pop their own Detonator and then bring back with Twins of the Eclipse. So you haven't really accomplished much. Against something like Blue Eyes, Imperm can be decent. I would say, let's say on a barrel, definitely more impactful there, but for the most part they can eat through at least one Imperm for sure. And then Mermail, you know what, again, they play through a lot of hand traps, so Imperm on its own not really going to do much. Nibiru is still up top. This one to me is a little bit kind of in a way weird. I kind of understand it. I can never really say that it's been super, you know, impressive, overwhelming or anything, at least by itself. Because you know what, for the most part, like on its own, I would say against the top decks, it's not gonna just win you games by itself, like it did in some formats maybe. Against Blue Eyes at least, it can definitely do something, just because they don't actually have a way to negate Blue Eyes unless you're playing like the Invoke version, which, let's be real, none of those versions have topped so far. But for the most part, even Blue Eyes can still set up something through Nibiru, but they do have to eat it at least. So then you have Call By. I did talk about all those other hand traps that are in the format right now, so it is definitely a must. But you know what, it comes up in a lot of different applications. You have a lot of Fiendsmith stuff, so you know what, getting rid of, let's say, the Requiem or even maybe Lacrima, like just one of those two can be really nice to stop the recursion. You have something like, let's say, Blue Eyes, you know, getting rid of the Maiden is also strong, or let's say they already used the Roar, you can even consider maybe getting rid of the Blue Eyes, and then you start getting rid of the other one with the Abyss Shields, and it can be pretty deadly there. So even let's say against Raziel, you have something like the Twins of the Eclipse that can be a nice one to hit as well. Against Malice, outside of hand traps, doesn't really come up, I guess, other than maybe like, let's say, White Binder, which I guess actually, you know what, that can be pretty strong. So next you have Fuwalos, and you know, it's funny, I bet this will actually be higher in terms of representation if it was affordable, which it will be soon once Quarter Century Stampede drops in about a month from now actually. So because this is taking account of, you know, YCS but also regional level topping lists, yeah, you know what, even at the regional level there's gonna be people that don't want to pay for this card, right? So it's totally understandable, but it is very strong against pretty much every deck right now. And so again, you have something like, let's say, Lancia, and then you have something like Fuwalos for even Malice instead of, let's say, Chaos Hunter, which we'll get to near the end. But Fuwalos on its own really strong, as well as some of the other Mulcharmies out there. We talked about hand traps, talents, being able to rip another card out of the opponent's hand, really strong, going second, taking. And then you've seen even some Blue Eyes lists, they can't make Zeus on their own, but they play maximum like 3 talents and then take opponent's Xyz monster, let's say like Detonator or something, and then you attack and then you slap on a Zeus on top of it. So there's been some other applications lately. Abyss Shields in general, I would say sure, they're still solid. There's still a decent amount of Fiendsmith going around, and it's always going to be good there. But I would say the representation of Bestial is probably higher than it really is, just because Malice, they're playing this in their list, not so to banish the opponent's monsters, but more so to banish their own monsters, to keep extending, especially when they get hit with Imperm, let's say, on their first normal summon. So I would say it's, you know, decent, but obviously if you're trying to go against Malice, like, Bestials aren't really going to help you. Against Raziel, like, realistically, maybe getting rid of the Twins of the Clips. Druid's Worm, trying to get rid of Detonator isn't as good anymore, because if they actually do have Twins of the Clips under already, they can just bring it back. Not to mention the cross field spell negate as well. But of course, against Blue Eyes, which is a new emerging threat, Bestials can be very, very good just to get rid of their Maiden, their Blue Eyes, for example. And then you have other top decks like, let's say, Mermail, which isn't going to care about Bestials. And even Crestron is seeing a decent amount of play and some success, and they're also not going to care about Bestials. Next, you have Dueling Book. So this one's a really good one, because against Raziel, it's very, very solid, especially Mitsurugi Raziel, which I don't think is seeing as much play as it was before. The pure Raziel is still kind of the most popular one, it looks like, and Duel does definitely do a lot of wonders against that. They can still most likely set up a Detonator though, which is, I mean, against some decks maybe still enough. You have something like Malice where Droll really isn't that good. Even against Mermail, which historically has been so good against them before they got the new support. Nowadays, I really can't say Droll is a turn ender for them. And especially even when you're going first against Mermail, and you even resolve Droll, I've seen them plenty of times still be able to OTK under Droll. So I would say the only real true hand trap that completely shuts down Mermail is Dimension Shifter. So next we have Effect Failure. You know, we talked about Imperm, Effect Negation, pretty solid. Effect Failure, you're going to see a lot more increase in play right now because of Blue Eyes, because this is just another one that they can do an extra normal summon under Mausoleum, and you know what, helps with their synchro plays in a pinch when they kind of get interrupted, and they can also search Effect Failure off Sage, off Wishes, so that's probably why you're seeing a bit of a higher representation of Veiler than usual. And then you have Pearlia, which is always good against something like, let's say, Raziel. They do summon a lot from hand. For Malice, not nearly as great, you know, other than their first normal summon. Maybe they do have to use their Bestials to extend, but for the most part, not that amazing. But let's say against something like Mermail, they also still summon from the hand. That can still be impactful as well. Next, you have some back row removal and Heartbeat's Feather Duster. Nothing too special here, I would say. In the side, it's pretty common nowadays. You have a lot of hand traps, and then just the generic cards you're fitting in is something like Feather Duster and a couple Lightning Storms. Just blow the back row. Against Raziel, you just want to get rid of the field spell, not just for the monster negate, but because to try to stop their recursion, because it's really strong, and once you get rid of their field spell, they usually can't really get it back. Against Malice, you can at least force out some of the traps, and then just at least try to play through without having like your graveyard banished. Against Mermail, obviously it's going to be completely useless. Against Blue Eyes, it can be pretty good, of course. If you can get rid of, let's say, their True Light, then their field does nuke, except if they already have their Synchro 9 and Spirit Dragon up, they can negate their own True Light effect, but still, I would still have it nonetheless. Next, you have Metal Trona. So this has been pretty popular actually for the last couple of months. It's pretty versatile, being a quick play as well. It can be stopped by Ash though, which is kind of the downside, but for the most part, you're seeing people play this and let's say a Detonator in their extra deck so they can kind of handle that. For example, there's some other, let's say with Bestials that can come up with Metal Tronus as well, and there's some other weirder, not so common applications. Let's say I've seen, let's say Beryl, it's an Earth 1600, so they can have, let's say in Malice, Nightmare Cerberus, that can also be a target for that, or even let's say even Baguska, it's an Earth Fiend, which Nightmare Cerberus also fits that, and you can use Metal Tronus for that as well. Moving on, we have Crossout Designator. This is more so seen, I want to say, in Raziel lists, the pure one at least, they really want to go through, especially something like Droll. So I'm sort of on the camp where I feel that hand traps should resolve, especially just because cards like Crossout Designator, it's great for, let's say, rogue decks to try to survive with this hand trap heavy format, but it makes tier 1 decks so much stronger than they already are, and that's why I feel like hopefully this card maybe also does get hit in some fashion. I mean, OCG did hit it, but I can kind of understand people wanting to keep it around. Mulch-Charming Mules, the newer Mulch-Charming card, this can also hit a lot on Malice, which is kind of nice compared to, let's say, Chaos Hunter, which we'll get to at the end, because Chaos Hunter, we kind of talked about Nightmare and Cerberus actually. If they can make that, then they can still out the Chaos Hunter and keep going. But whereas Melcharming Meows, let's say Lancia, at least it's something you can shotgun, and they can't really play around that other than, I don't know, cross out and call by. And then you have Ultimate Slayer. This is more so a rise yield tech. So being able to get rid of the detonator and then the aggregator also negating the field spell, definitely really strong. Against Malice, you're probably not putting this in because you have to prioritize putting Lancia, Chaos Hunter, or Meows, Mulch Army cards. So there's probably no reason for that. Not to mention, there's not really many good link targets you send off Ultimate Slayer if you even have the room. It's probably something like Bucephalus, and then you send the Garura, draw 1. But for the most part, this is really there for Raziel. Against other decks, it doesn't really come up as well, I would find, because let's say Mermail, if you even get there, board breakers aren't really the best because you're going to get hand loop for 2. So you're probably not surviving. You need hand traps. Even if you do have Ultimate Slayer, they have their link 2 that can just protect targeting for their Toad. So it doesn't really matter there. For Blue Eyes, it's a little iffy. It kind of can be good, but if they also have Drill Beam, there goes that. They do have targeting protection, but you still cannot respond with that for Ultimate Slayer just because it's still a monster effect. But nonetheless, you know, they still have other ways around it. So next you have Solemn Strike. The Solemn cards have been pretty popular lately. It's just incredibly strong, just especially being able to negate a special summon, right? So against Malice, if you just wait until they summon a Link 3 and then you strike that, it's usually a really turn ending. And it's just overall very good card. Some people even main deck this card. You have Triple Tactics Thrust. This isn't seeing as much play as it was before. As you will notice, you don't see D barrier nearly as high as, let's say, a few months ago when I did this tier list. So not nearly as popular. And speaking of that, Dimension Barrier kind of comes hand in hand with that. Really hits Raziel. Against Malice, it's going to be completely useless. Against Mermail, I mean, I'm not really sure. I guess you call it Xyz. And then against, let's say, Blue Eyes, sure, you can call Synchro. They still have, let's say, the Link plays, and they even have Tyrant Dragon Infusion, so they can still do some stuff around. Dominus Impulse. So this is really good. You have, let's say, Mermail seeing a lot of play recently. They can play this very easily. It's an incredibly strong hand trap if you can play it. Even Malice, they can play it. A lot of the Malice lists are also cutting Dot Scraper, which was an Earth, and that was one of the things that conflicted with Impulse, but you know what, now they don't really have to worry about that. And then you have Lightning Storm. I talked about this with like Feather Duster and plus Lightning Storms. Like usually you're probably just signing this in for generic board wipe or more so for the back removal. But you know what? Some, let's say, Fiendsmith versions, if they do put out a Caesar, it's kind of nice to be able to easily out it with this one. And I talked about the Solemn cards, and Solemn Judgment as a side option, really strong, just because it also negates spell traps, and then you just can also negate just generic inherent summons as well. So again, something like Malice, you stop the Link 3 summon, and you're probably in a really good state there. And then speaking of Malice, we have Dimension Shifter. It would be a lot higher if a lot of different decks could play it, because on its own in a vacuum, it is probably the strongest hand trap. Hopefully it gets hit. I think it's just so frustrating to have to go through a completely strong Malice board. On top of that, you're still under Shifter. Really makes it just shuts things all off a lot cases, and it just hopefully finally goes away. But we've been saying that for quite some time now. And then you have Ghost Ogre. So this has been sort of an under the radar hand trap. I would say it's not incredible, but it has some pretty good applications. I'd say it's more specifically Blue Eyes, True Light. You pop it, it nukes their field. Again, if they have Spirit Dragons up, they can just negate that though. Against, let's say, Raziel, we've always known that you can hit the dual drive with Ghost Ogre. Against Malice, it's not amazing. I guess maybe you hit the first normal summon effect just to get rid of the bodies, but it's not doing that much. Against Mermail, it's also not that amazing either. So I would say it's okay. If you have room to fit it, I guess you might as well. And then finally, we have Chaos Hunter. I kind of talked about this briefly earlier, but you have something like Lancia and Mulch Army cards. That's probably the priority there. Chaos Hunter does fall victim to something like Nightmare Cerberus that can just out this. So that's sort of the downside. But nonetheless, if you especially don't have Mulch Army cards, then you might as well just play this along with Lancia to try to combat against Malice. Alright guys, so that was it for the hand trap and staple tier list for this month. Hopefully you found that helpful. Really excited to see what's going to happen at YCS Vegas. Unfortunately, there is no live stream, I heard, so that's too bad, but hopefully we get some exciting turnout as well. So anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching the video. Big thanks as always to my Patreons and sponsors for the continued support. And again, check out Derpy Cards, use code Hakuna5 for 5% off, as well as code Hakuna5 or Hakuna10 and all of my different sponsors. So anyways, big thanks to all of you, and take care.